Mac Side Up by Bob Elsdale. Mac was one cool cat. Sure, he was handsome, clever, and brave. All cats are. But Mac was something more. He loved adventure. Dusty was one cool ferret. When Dusty and Mac played hide and seek, Dusty found all the best places to hide. Cereal boxes were a favorite, especially the ones with the free gifts inside. On this day, she'd found a pair of pink glasses. Dusty peeked out of the box, and whoosh! Mac pounced. He surfed across the table on a slice of warm buttered toast. The toast fell down, 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 and plop! It landed butter side down on the floor. Mac landed on his paws. As he cleaned up the floor with his rough tongue, Mac wondered, why does toast always land the wrong way up, but cats always land the right way up? Hmm. Later, as he lay in bed, Mac kept thinking about that toast. What if, what if I strapped a piece of buttered toast to my back and jumped from a great height? What would happen? Mac wasn't sure, but he knew he had to find out. In the morning, Mac had a plan. Dusty ferreted around in the desk and found paper and markers. Mac drew a picture of how he would solve the mystery. He drew a special truck and himself. Dusty added a pile of mattresses. She knew, of course, that cats have 9 lives. She wasn't sure how many lives Mac had already used up, but she knew it was always a good idea to be careful. There was a vehicle that would be perfect for the stunt. It was made from an old ice cream truck joined with a fire engine. They sold ice cream from the front and used the back for bungee jumping. Dusty checked the equipment while Mac looked on. "You'll need a crash helmet, too," she told Mac. The big day arrived. The crowd of people gathered to see what was going on. Once everything was ready, Mac was slowly pulled up. Higher and higher he went. Dusty had fitted a walkie-talkie to Mac's helmet so she could talk to him from ground control. The countdown began. 5. It certainly is high up here, Mac thought. 4. Yes, very high. 3. Remember, cats are clever, thought Mac. 2. Mac shut his eyes and took a big breath. Remember, cats are brave. Dusty pulled the lever and Mac hurtled toward Earth. He shouted into his microphone, "This is cool! This is a breeze!" Dusty wished she had thought about a parachute. And what was that seagull doing there? The seagull had spotted the toast and he was hungry. He tried to spear it, but Dusty had superglued the toast to the plate. The seagull tried again, but his shiny beak slid off the slippery plate and put Mac in a spin. The world was now upside down. Would Mac and the toast land right side up or butter side down? But Mac, like all cats, was clever and brave, and he was one cool cat. He started to straighten. He was almost the right way up. Could he do it? Yes! A perfect landing. One giant leap for catkind. The crowd cheered. Mac and Dusty gave high fives. Mac had done it. He had proved that cats always land on their paws, and toast does not always land butter side down. Mac's picture was in the paper. His great leap was shown on TV. He was even given a gold medal. For a very brave and special cat, it said on the back. And it was true. Mac was one cool cat, which was good. I'm sure being so cool helped him to always land on his feet. But how he was able to right himself and regain his bearings after getting turned around and around, how he managed to avoid end up being toast. I applaud Mac and cats like him. But I sure would like to know how he did it because right now it feels like there's a great many of us who have lost our cool, who are being dropped from a great height, and it feels anything but sure that we'll wind up on our feet. A pandemic is here. Cases are growing, not declining. People are dying. At first, we had Dr. Fauci and the CDC and the whole scientific community to give it to us straight. But now a lot of things that we're hearing begin to sound crooked. More Black men have been dying. They're number one on the victim list from police violence and from effects of COVID too. But they're at the back of every line in forms of assistance. Cell phone videos of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Jacob Blake show that Black men live under a different and harsher set of rules. The need for reform seems obvious, but it is still roundly contested. So we watch paramilitary troops squelch Black Lives Matters protests and white men with assault rifles occupy state capitals. The sermon today is about laws and rules and regulation and the kind of thing that we all count on for safety and order and fairness. So today I want to talk about the people we turn to uphold these rules, what we count on, so that we're not all constantly turning end over end, trying to figure out which way is up. A lot of what I share this morning comes from a particular podcast that I've listened to called Against the Rules. And it helps me make sense of some of the crazy we've been seeing masquerading as normal life. The program was produced by a writer named Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis understands rules. For many years, he served on a usage panel, sort of a fancy umpire in the major leagues of dictionaries. He served with a couple hundred other word experts. And every year for a decade, they would get an email asking them to judge the latest word controversies. Is it okay to say unique when we mean unusual? When we use the word decimated, as in the current state of our civil discourse, is it mostly destroyed or simply 1/10 destroyed? Well, Michael Lewis got his annual email, only this one contained only one word, dismissed, as in fired. He didn't even know it was possible to be fired from an unpaid volunteer position. Seems that the rise of the internet has been bad on dictionary sales, but low sales are no reason to fire volunteers. The dismissal, it turns out, is part of a larger wave of deregulating and removing authority from all parts of society, and also removing accountability. The elimination of the word referee is not that unusual, says Lewis. No one particularly mourns their death until they really need one. To understand why any of this matters, I want to introduce you to a cat named Alex Cogan. Like Mac the cat, he was cool. He loved adventure, but there's a backstory. Alex's family emigrated to New York when the Soviet Union collapsed. They were getting death threats for being Jewish. And so when they settled in Brooklyn, Alex enrolled in school and was immediately picked on for being tall and for not speaking English. His grandmother committed suicide. His parents split up. Winds up, Alex Cogan, surprise, wants to study psychology when he gets to college. Specifically, he wants to understand love and resiliency, and human nature. So he gets a scholarship to Cal Berkeley. He winds up seeing things that no one else in his class or in his laboratory is able to see. For instance, he helps recognize the correlation between a particular gene and human kindness. Well, his fascination with love leads to him establishing 7 distinctly different kinds of expressions for love and how personality traits help to influence those expressions. He publishes papers that get attention. This leads him to a graduate program in Hong Kong and then a postgraduate program at Cambridge University in England. Fast forward to 2014. One of the PhD students in Alex's department calls him. He's working at a small startup company called SCL, and he wants to set up a meeting with Alex. Turns out that SCL was purchasing rights to data from a certain segment of Facebook users. They will allow Alex to use that data for his research. In exchange, he could help them establish some basic correlations between the patterns of when people press likes and the behavioral patterns and preferences that exist in their life. 2 years later, and an ocean away, 2 unlikely frontrunners emerge to lead the 2016 GOP presidential primary. I say unlikely because neither of them are the picture of traditional values normally associated with the GOP. Many political analysts and a whole lot of ordinary citizens do a double take when they start reading the primary results. But there it is, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. Well, after a few more primaries, it's May 2016, and Donald Trump is declared the party's candidate. Some thought that that signaled that we had reached the zenith of unpredictability. But then June rolls round, and another vote is held that shocks the world. Brexit. More specifically, Great Britain's referendum decision to leave the United Kingdom. At this point, millions of people are looking up in wonder, and they see a cat officially toe side down and falling fast. The ensuing political conversations coming out of the election between Trump and Hillary Clinton begin striking some new and disturbing tones. They're provocative and they're laced with malice and vitriol. We hear slogans and rhetoric that we've never heard before in any election. Fake news and lock her up. We begin to hold our breath as we encounter the rancid smell of the surreal fermenting. This is not good, we think. But at the same time, we feel, at least in the deep recesses of our soul, a certain glimmer of reassurance. Surely, we think, surely the American public will not surrender basic jurisprudence of common sense. Surely we will not give up so easily on decency and civility and ignore the fundamental dictates of moral character. And that's when it happened. The cat reached the ground, toe side down. Many were shocked, but not as much as we would be when we noticed that the cat didn't actually land, but instead the ground just opened up and the cat continued to fall. We looked down and wondered how deep this hole might go, whether there was another side, or why no one stepped in at any point to save the cat. So here's where it's important to connect some of the dots. Shortly after they hired Alex Kogan, SCL changed their name to Cambridge Analytica. Yes, that Cambridge Analytica. And they had purchased, with user consent, the rights to use the data of approximately 200,000 Facebook profiles. Kogan, as promised, helped them to develop some correlation between user responses and basic personality traits, which were then categorized into demographic profiles. Cambridge Analytica then used a data mining technique that was able to use those 200,000 profiles that they had purchased to harvest the data from all of their friends and other users who hadn't given consent. This amounted to them acquiring millions of user data profiles. Cambridge Analytica was a political election services company. They sold their rights and services to candidates running for office or people sponsoring ballot measures or referendum issues. Starting in 2015, they were hired by the Ted Cruz campaign. He went on to become a candidate from the rear of the crowd to the man to beat. But in early 2016, after Donald Trump hired Cambridge Analytica, he beat Cruz. They then did the same thing with Aaron Banks and Nigel Farage to influence the Brexit decision in Great Britain. And finally, the trifecta, helping Trump to beat Clinton in the presidential election. The strategy that Cambridge Analytica employed was through targeted propaganda bombing. They bragged that they had 4,000 to 5,000 data points on 270 million registered voters in the United States, similar numbers in Great Britain. And they didn't target every voter equally. They focused on just the ones their data determined to be, quote, the persuadables. They focused on the persuadables in swing states. They targeted specific precincts, specific people in those precincts, and specific character traits within those people. Cambridge Analytica used people's own data gathered without their permission against them. Using all of their own known triggers and fears, they bombarded them with blogs and websites and articles and ads until they saw, quote unquote, the world the way we wanted them to, until they voted the way we wanted them to, unquote. Now, when all of this came to light in 2018, Facebook claimed that they were a victim of this scheme. But since Facebook was the primary source for advertising in these political campaigns, they were able to monetize their victimhood pretty well. Between 10 and 20 billion dollars of profit in each of the 4 years between 2015 and 2019. Almost all the Cambridge Analytica organizers vanished with a lot of money and no accountability. Alex Kogan, on the other hand, had all of his research and all of his assets seized. It's very unlikely he will work for another research firm again. Facebook is in the midst of ethical and regulatory debates as to whether they have any responsibility to moderate false claims or information posted on their platforms. So far, they are showing little sign of accepting any liability for harm done. We look around and wonder how it got this way. Why is no one willing to step in and establish some authority around basic decency? Isn't there any place willing to dedicate itself to making sure we don't all go toast down? In Secaucus, New Jersey, next to strip mall motels, there's a 4-story nondescript building that cares a great deal about fairness. At least they say they do. There, amidst $15 billion of fiber optic cables and big screen TVs on every wall, you'll find the NBA's Replay Center. It's the Pentagon of sports fairness, where professional basketball referees review calls made by other professional basketball referees in real time to minimize error. It was built to persuade the public that the game and life is fair. Joe Borgia manages the referees who work there. Borgia was an NBA referee for 20 years. His father was an NBA referee before that, and his father's father was a ref. Borgia goes back in the NBA since 1946. but Joe reports to a higher authority. He calls her the general because she was. Before overseeing the replay center, Michelle Johnson ran the Air Force Academy. It is a serious business. The replay center corrects the calls of referees in any one of the 29 different arenas on the continent. They can review any play from 6 different angles at a 60th of a second. Everyone misses a call. The replay center sees what the refs miss. And some time ago, the NBA used this to start letting referees know how they were doing. They began to publish to the public all of the referees' missed calls that occurred in the last 2 minutes of games. And they published all of the missed calls for the entire games to all of the NBA teams. Today, stats are kept on each referee's accuracy. They even measure racial bias. All of these stats help determine how good the referee is, how many games they're asked to play, and how much money they're paid. Ask anyone in the replay booth or ask any referee whether refereeing today is better than it was 5 or 10 years ago, and they will say, without question. Ask anyone, that is, except the fans. Because chants of, "Ref, you suck."
And he is ejected in a game that saw him return.
Are louder and more volatile than they've ever been. And it doesn't lead to a good look, as Steve Kerr, coach of the Golden State Warriors, will tell you. Steve Kerr is widely known as one of the nicest and most socially conscious coaches in the game, but he says he loses it with refs in ways that embarrass him. He says, "It happens 2 or 3 times a year. I've been caught on camera where I'm effing a ref, and my daughter will send me a text the next day, aghast. 'What are you doing?' she'll ask. 'It's all over Twitter. I can read your lips. This is embarrassing.' I'm embarrassed," he says. But it's nothing compared to the players, and you'll see it every game. Protests, pleading, contempt, cursing. But one thing you'll notice if you look really closely and you follow the game, it doesn't come from all players evenly. It tends to come from some players more than others. It's mostly the stars. Refs and analysts will tell you, the bigger the star, the more they'll complain about the rules and how they're unfair against them, that it should be different for them. Well, back in 2014, a professor of psychology at Cal Berkeley wondered about the effect elitism had on people's behavior. It started when this professor was riding his bike up to a 4-way stop sign. He was halfway through this 4-way stop sign when this guy in a black Mercedes rolled right through, less than a half a foot away from taking him out. The guy who was driving was on his cell phone, and looks were exchanged. Anger and contempt flashed both ways. And so this professor devised an experiment. He arranged to hide Berkeley undergraduates in the bushes near that 4-way stop. And they noted the makes and models of all the cars coming through the intersection and assigned them values 1 through 5. And these values were assigned according to market value. A new Mercedes is a 5, a Honda a 3, an old Pacer a 1. With the undergraduate positioned at the pedestrian zone, leaning into the crosswalk where a car is legally required to stop, almost none of the drivers of poor cars ran through the pedestrian zone. But nearly 45% of the drivers of the cars from rich clientele, the 5s, rolled through. The greater your privilege, the less rules apply. In this modern internet age, it's tempting to want to believe that our instant 20-second scan across Google can make us an authority on a topic. And so our opinion should count just as much as any one of the experts out there, which is frankly becoming a little easier because there are fewer and fewer experts out there now. I mean, who wants to be an authority when it comes with so much grief? And yet, I have this fantasy that during the press conference, when we question the efficacy of wearing a mask or undermine the findings of climate change scientists or throw out some preposterous bald-faced lie during the middle of a debate, that someday someone will throw a flag and it will go upstairs to a replay booth and the game will stop until a ruling comes down. And as the truth comes forth, the game will change. Maybe, who knows, we'll change too. I'd like to think that if that day ever comes, that the gates of heaven will open just slightly and a set of arms may reach out into the thin blue air and they will catch a cat and they will place it gently, toe side up. Maybe it won't happen. Maybe Dusty was right. Maybe we should have all just packed a parachute and a crash helmet. Still, I believe in the truth and the power of love to bring people together, and the day we're adventurous enough to agree on the terms that it takes to take care of each other. Until that day, friends, the Zuckerbergs and the Bezos and the Trumps and all the rest will be flying high above us, and they will look out from their luxurious first-class window and they may just see a cat falling toe side down, and they'll probably think nothing of it because they know it takes each one of us to pull ourselves out of self-absorption to escape manipulation. It takes all of us to come together to agree on upholding some standards of decency and kindness, and it will take a whole lot of really cool cats to be there when those planes land so that we can hold them all accountable.